Hi everyone, and welcome to Deep Geek Live. This is the pre-show live stream for episode 1 and 2, sort of The Rings of Power. I say 1 and 2, sort of, because both of them are going to be dropped at the same time. Check where you are locally, but for most people it will be 4 hours from when I am talking now. So what I'm planning on doing is giving a sort of an introduction to The Rings of Power. I did a video which released about an hour or so ago, which was my condensed version. But what I thought most people would find quite useful is a slightly more expanded understanding of what it is that we're going to be seeing. What is this world that we're going to be visiting? Yes, it's Middle-earth, but Second Age Middle-earth, what's that all about? And I haven't seen episodes 1 and 2, so I'm not going to be spoiling anything, I promise it, but I will give a sort of a spoiler-free overview of what I thought after I've done the overall introduction. The other thing to say just before we get started is that this live stream, all my pre-show live streams on both this and House of the Dragon for this season, is a charity live stream. It is in aid of Alzheimer's care and research. Alzheimer's is a horrible disease, really, really horrible disease. And if you can spare the money, if you would like to show your appreciation for me or the channel or the world in general, whatever, please, please, please be as generous as you are able. There should be a donate button somewhere around the screen, and that should be staying open all the way through the live stream, and if you're watching it back later, it should still be there. We're on, I think, something like $1,600 for the season so far. That's for the House of the Dragon season. I would love to get to $2,000 by the end of this live stream, so if we can, that would be fantastic. But that said, let me get into this. Quick shout out, actually, Hax Dogma I see is there in the chat. Hax is one of the finest human beings on the planet and also has one of the finest YouTube channels on the planet. Covers Westworld brilliantly, better than anyone else, I would personally argue, and plenty of other things. So hopefully one of the moderators can give a little bit of a link to Hax's channel. But this is about the Rings of Power. So I'm going to start with an overview of what it is that we're going to be watching. Now, the Rings of Power is set in the Second Age. This is what we were told to start with, the Second Age of Middle-earth. Now, Tolkien clearly had a huge background and history and legendarium to build upon. This is the age before the age that we know from The Lord of the Rings, The Hobbit. That was at the end of the Third Age, so this is 3,000 years and more before that. So we're looking a long way back, and the name The Rings of Power is because this is, ignoring everything else, this is an attempt at an origin story for the rings. I say an attempt. The reason why I say it's an attempt, and I will allow everyone to judge for themselves whether it's a successful attempt or not, but the reason I say that is because there are a couple of issues here that we do have to address straight away. The first is that Tolkien didn't write huge amounts about the Second Age, it has to be said. The Second Age covers 3,500 years. He gave us a timeline. He gave us one complete or near complete story called The Mariner's Wife, a few bits of background, some detail about some key events, and that's roughly it. He left some very big gaps. There are quite literally a few periods of 100 years, a few hundred years, where we have no information about what was going on. So there is a vacuum of information here from the showrunners. The second thing we have to deal with is the fact that most of the stuff that we have from Tolkien himself for this period is in the Silmarillion, and it's in the Book of Unfinished Tales, both of which I highly recommend. I would love you to go out and read them. The showrunners, Prime Video, did not have the rights to either of those things. What they had the rights to, I believe, what they still have the rights to, they may have bought more rights, I don't know, is The Hobbit, The Lord of the Rings, and the Appendices to The Lord of the Rings. The Appendices, I won't go into the whole background to this, but basically there was a bit of a literary battle after The Hobbit and the publishers wanted a follow-up to The Hobbit, and Tolkien said, "I've got just the thing, the Silmarillion." And they said, "Yeah, it's not really what we're looking for. We're wanting something slightly more hobbity." And eventually he wrote The Lord of the Rings, but he said, "I've got great idea. Let's publish the Silmarillion alongside it." And they went, "Yeah, not so sure about that." And eventually they came to this is very high level, but eventually they came to an agreement that he could condense all of this background information, world building stuff, into what became the appendices to the Return of the King. So we have a condensed version there, and that's what we've got that they've built off for here. Now, the showrunners have made quite a big thing of letter 131 that I haven't actually got in front of me to quote. Bad Robert, I should have thought of that about that. But what that talked about was that Tolkien initially thought what he wanted to do with all of this was to create a vast tapestry of events with some smaller stories and some big background information, and then leave space for other minds and hands. That's the quote that is often used. Other minds and hands to finish off, to add in extra detail, to tell stories. And that is what the showrunners are doing. Now, to my mind, if that's what Tolkien's idea was, that he was creating this vast tapestry with some gaps for other people to do it, then the concept of doing that is great. Got no problems with that at all. So I personally would say the issue now is this good? And I will leave that to you to decide when you get to see it, which should hopefully be in only a few hours' time. But what we have here, we've had a huge amount of pre-publicity. We've had lots of trailers. So I'm not giving away any spoilers when I go through the background of what we have got going on. To understand the Second Age, though, we probably should start by talking a little bit about the First Age, because this provides the backdrop for the Second Age. The First Age was a very long battleground in many ways. There were some huge battles. Morgoth, who was the big baddie of Tolkien's Legendarium, against the elves and humans of Middle-earth. And eventually, at the end of the First Age, the Valar, the sort of the godly angelic creatures, expressions of Eru Ilúvatar's mind, they came with the host of Valinor and defeated Morgoth and his army. And the world was changed, and the Second Age began. And Morgoth was gone, banished to the void, chained. Some elements of his army remained. Now, the key one here is Sauron. He was his chief lieutenant. Sauron did survive, and he disappears. We don't know where he goes. He's not anywhere in the Legendarium for the first millennium or so of the Second Age. He's disappeared and gone. We hear of a few dragons which fly off to the northeast. We know at least one Balrog survived. That's the Balrog who appears in the Third Age as Durin's Bane, and some orcs scattered around perhaps on the fringes of society also survived. So they're out there somewhere, but broadly speaking, when we reach the Second Age, this is a time for the first millennium or so of peace and prosperity and growth. And we get the elves. Many of the elves decided to go back to Valinor, but quite a lot stayed. They are headed up in Lindon by the High King of the Elves of the West, Gil-galad, who's a little bit of a legend himself. We have Elrond, who is around. He's quite a young elf at this point. He was only born towards the end of the First Age, so he's there of legendary ancestry, but he's still quite a young elf. Galadriel is around, as is Celeborn. So they're there. We have Celebrimbor, who is the last of the line of Feanor to survive. Feanor was this legendary elf. If you want to know more about Feanor, I did a video. But he is a great craftsman, Celebrimbor. We know later on in the Second Age. He's the craftsman who creates the Rings of Power with Sauron in disguise. So the elves are there. There are some other elves that we read a little bit less about who are further off to the east. They're the elves that never went to Valinor in the first place, but they are definitely still there. The dwarves are there. There are 7 dwarf clans. We really only hear about the one most of the time, the Longbeards, Durin's folk. They are in what we think of as the Mines of Moria, but at the time, mine, they call it a mine. It's not a mine. It is the greatest city, Khazad-dûm, the greatest city known to humanity, not humanity, but to the Middle-earth at the time. It is astonishing work. It takes 2-3 days to walk across it, and it's many levels high, many levels deep, extends up and down the misty mountains. It's astonishing. It's bright, it's airy, it's a wonder of the world. So that's Khazad-dûm, and that's the dwarves. The humans, we've got very broadly, two types of humans going on. The humans who sided with the elves against Morgoth, they got rewarded with this new island kingdom of Numenor, which during the Second Age, it reached the height, the peak of human civilization. It was they created wonders in and of itself. They were a great seafaring folk, and one of the magnificent themes of the Second Age is the rise and fall of Numenor. The other mode of humans that we have tend to live off in the south and east of Middle-earth. They are the remnants of the people who once supported Morgoth, or probably more accurately fell under Morgoth's spell. So they are there, and their descendants will be known as the people who are there in the sort of the far, in the Haradrim and people like that. So they're off in the far east and south of the map. There's also, and this is new with a little asterisk, I'll come back to that in a moment, for the show, the Harfords. These are the ancestor people of the hobbits. Now, I said new with an asterisk. It's reasonably clear from what Tolkien wrote that the hobbits, although the first time they're recorded in history is at some point in the mid to late Third Age, they descended from humanity. So they were there earlier back in time, but they were just not written into the pages of history. So they're in the show's version, they are sort of proto-hobbits, still short and living quite a sort of nomadic lifestyle, it's probably fair to say. So that's the setup. And what the showrunners were wanting to do with all of this in season 1 is to show how we could get from this state of sort of a watchful peace. That's a specific phrase which is used for the Third Age, but I think it works for here as well. A watchful peace where there is still evil out there somewhere in the world, but broadly speaking, all of the free peoples of the world are free. They can prosper, they can live their life in peace. How do you get from that to a point where midway through the Second Age, Sauron can trick people into forging the Rings of Power and then launch a huge invasion, taking over almost all of Middle-earth, and then lots of other things follow. Later seasons will cover the other kind of tentpole moments of the Second Age. They will cover the rise and fall of Numenor. They will cover we've got the forging of the Rings of Power. We've got the last alliance of elves and men as well. So these things will come up. So that's the idea, that the show as a whole, the 5 seasons of the show, because that's what we've been told we're going to have, is going to cover the entirety of the Second Age. The big problem that the showrunners identified was the timeline, because you can say, okay, the first we come into this about the year 1000, but then what about the next 2.5 millennia? Are you going to try and show all of that? Their decision, for good and or ill, was to do a timeline contraction. So the best way, I think, to understand this is that Isildur and Elendil, who we know are there right the way at the end of the Second Age, they are alive and well when we enter this story. So during their lifespan, we will see all of the events of the second half of the Second Age. That's what they're doing. They're squashing it down. I will come on later on this live stream to what that might mean in terms of timeline contraction, what the problems of that might be. The big win as far as the showrunners are concerned, which is what they said, was that they therefore will not have to change half the cast every season or so. If they'd tried to cover all of this, then the humans would die out. The dwarves would die out every single time there was a major event. And what they wanted was some sort of continuity of cast, which I can understand from a showrunner's perspective. So that's the sort of the overarching concept of what we're going to be seeing in the Rings of Power. Season 1, as I say, the entry point for us, I think, will probably be Galadriel, because she's a character that we know. She's a character that we trust from the Third Age, and it's probably worth saying that there are characters that we know from the Third Age, her in particular, but also Elrond, who this is earlier in their timeline. Now, there has been some controversy about how they might be depicting Galadriel. We'll see that when we see the show, but it's fair to say Tolkien was quite a good writer, and he understood character development and he understood character arcs. So the Galadriel we see at the end of the Third Age is not going to be the Galadriel we see here in the early to mid Second Age. There's thousands of years of character development there between the two. So we wouldn't expect to see the same Galadriel. The Galadriel we knew from what Tolkien wrote even earlier was proud, was headstrong. We know that she was a great athlete. We know that she was a fighter as well. She fought in the kinslaying of Aquilunde. Or Alquilunde. So that is where she was. What we're seeing is a version perhaps somewhere between the two. Where on that arc, I don't know, but do not expect the version of Galadriel we got at the end. Similarly, do not expect the version of Elrond that we see at the end. This is, as I said, a young Elrond. He's only been around for a short while by elf measurements. So yeah, don't expect a particularly boring stay-at-home kind of haughty. That's me. That's slightly harsh on Hugo Weaving's portrayal, perhaps, but you know what I mean. That Elrond that we saw in The Lord of the Rings is not the Elrond we're going to be seeing here. Happy birthday, the Great A. Just a very quick shout out. Gray Avon saying elves certainly aren't timeless. Thousands of years of character development, definitely. And for those who've only seen or read elves of the Third Age, elves in the First Age are certainly not all good and pure and wonderful. There's some really quite spicy stuff that Tolkien writes about in the earlier eras of elfdom, and expect the same in the Second Age. Not all elves are wonderful. Fog Bank saying, given the comparative dearth of primary source material regarding the Second Age, there's a lot of wiggle room. Yes, there is a lot of wiggle room. I think that's I mean, it depends what you count as wiggle room. There is space for stories there, definitely. Now, the question obviously is, A, how good are the stories, and B, how much do they match up to the kind of the ethos of Tolkien's work? Those things we'll have to wait and see. But yes, there is space for new stories. Chris H saying she was present at the Kingslaying, she didn't participate. Well, this actually, thank you for raising that. This is one of those issues that I should, if you don't mind me using this as an example, some of the things we do have about the Second Age, Tolkien changed his mind on a lot. So we have particularly the story of Galadriel and Celeborn, but this applies to lots of other things. What we have in terms of published content from Tolkien is firstly what he published during his lifetime, and then secondly what Christopher Tolkien, his son, pulled together as an edited version of what he's got from various places. And there are some bits where what Tolkien wrote, it's not 100% sure what he considered to be the final / best version of something, because he never got something published. And whether a later version of something which he scribbled down in an unfinished essay counts for more than something that he wrote a bit earlier, which fed into The Lord of the Rings, is a matter of scholarly debate. So on that specific example, there is a very clear line in, if you look in Unfinished Tales, the chapter about Galadriel and Celeborn, there is a very specific line about her fighting there. Now, that is that what Tolkien intended? That certainly at one point in the development of the character. So when you're taking what Tolkien has written about the Second Age, we have to understand that his creation was for him always changing and always morphing. This is quite hard for those of us who want to have a very clear timeline to grapple with. And indeed for those of us who want to have a very clear language to grapple with. There are interviews, quite literally several interviews out there where somebody was scribbling down in shorthand, and Tolkien started talking about a word in Quenya or whatever, and then mid-sentence decided that actually no, that wasn't right. He would just conjugate the verb slightly differently and came up with something completely different. He was constant, and he iterated a number of times that this was a work in progress for him, and it would remain a work in progress. So that was a rather long digression, but the main point here is that I personally fully subscribe to the fact that yes, we can take what we've got in The Hobbit, Lord of the Rings, and the other published things like Unfinished Tales, like the Silmarillion, as what Tolkien wrote, but we always have to be aware that for him, this was remaining a movable feast. Okay, so Matt Savino saying, I want to see him and Sauron having a sing-off. I've no idea who you're talking to, but it sounds amazing. We're up to $1,700. Thank you so much for everyone. I haven't been able to note and shout out everybody who has donated, but thank you so much if you have donated already. Let me give my I hesitate to say a no spoiler review. I think I tweeted I was going to do a no spoiler review. This isn't a review channel. I don't review things. That's not what I've ever done. And frankly, it's not something that I ever intend to do. I don't wish to review things, tell you whether something's good or not. What my intention for this channel is to talk about the things that I enjoy. The books, the TV shows that I enjoy. And if you also enjoy those things, then I invite you to come here and share that love with me. So that's what I do. What I will do here, though, is because I've seen episodes 1 and 2, and I know there's a huge amount of interest in them, and lots of people have asked me. You can see them yourselves in just a few hours, but I will give you my overall impressions now, and I'd love to talk more about them next week. We're going to be doing these pre-show live streams this time Thursday every week all the way through the show. So what did I think? Well, firstly, I probably have to say I saw this on a big screen. Lots of people have now, actually, incidentally, so I'm not alone in seeing this. Thousands of people now have. They've been given away lots of free tickets to this kind of thing. So I saw this on a big screen, and it was very apparent that this was, if not made for a big screen, then it certainly, the amount of money that has been thrown at this makes it work very well on a big screen. The effects, the sound works really well. I do not know how that will transfer across to your TV in your own home. So I'm not 100% sure on that. But I will say, as a visual spectacle, what I saw was pretty amazing. What it looked like in terms of Khazad-dûm, I thought was fantastic. I thought that Linden worked really well. It felt visually like I was coming to Middle-earth, and that feeling was something that I was desperately hoping for. This should not be too much of a surprise, given that this was John Howe's kind of visual landscape. John Howe, for those who do not know, he's a legendary Tolkien artist, has been for decades. He was the person who shaped the vision that we saw on screen with Peter Jackson's films. So a lot of the images that you will have in your mind of what Middle-earth looks like comes from, if you think of what a Balrog looks like, that comes from his drawings of what a Balrog is that appeared on the screen. If you think about what Gandalf looks like, if you think of the striding along with the staff and the hat and things, this comes from his pen. This is where this is the visual landscape that we have from Middle-earth, and it is on screen. And this is not all. There are special effects, of course. There are special effects, but it's very clear they built a lot of this stuff. They literally built things on a huge scale, which shows as well, I would say. So I hope that transfers well to a small screen, but we'll have to wait and see on that one. So visually, it looked good. The soundtrack, which you can listen to yourself now on wherever you get your music from, is really good. I talked about this before. Bear McCreary has done a fantastic job on this. Some of the things, particularly Khazad-dûm and a few others, they are spectacular in my view. So I think the music itself is excellent. I will say the opening 10 minutes or so, if you are like me, a Tolkien nerd who's read their way through the Silmarillion several times and knows a lot of this stuff upside down, the opening 10 minutes is where you can see where they do not have the rights. I will leave it like that. You can see the gaps where they can't show or tell exactly the stuff that they're not allowed to show or tell, and so the world, the background has been kind of shaped around that. Now, that doesn't mean that the first 10 minutes for me were necessarily all bad. There were a couple of things in there. I leave it to you to guess what they are when you see them. But there are a couple of moments there that I suspect most other Tolkien fans look at and go, whoa, that's good. These are things we have never seen before, and they were amazing. So there was some spectacular stuff there. I thought the acting was really good. I thought that a lot of the reviews talk about the pace. Some of them talk about it being too fast-paced. Some of them talk about it being too slow-paced. There is a lot of story they're trying to get in. And as a result, it kind of moves around quite a bit between different parts of Middle-earth, which is, it's fine. If you imagine, like if you think of sort of early bits of Game of Thrones when they had different plots going on. One of the plots was going on at the Wall. One was Daenerys over in Essos. One of them showing down in King's Landing. And early on, it was like, okay, so what's happening in all of these different places? But slowly, it starts coming together. That seems to be what they're doing now. I think that they will start, these plot lines will start coming together. But to start with, there are plots happening in different places. So I think that's probably it in terms of my overall thoughts. If there's anyone else in the chat who has seen, as I say, they put on a lot of screeners. If there's anyone else who has seen them and wants to put a short spoiler-free review into the chat box, please do feel free. Clueless Fangirl, hi there, good to see you. Saying Robert knows my love for dwarves. Yes, Helen is a huge dwarf fan. She realizes that they are better than elves in every way possible. Ricky Bobby saying, I'm a huge Tolkien fan. Is this worth seeing? I'm not going to tell you whether you will enjoy it. What I will tell you is I think you should give it a go. There are certainly some things in there that I thought were amazing. Let's go just have a quick flick through. Yeah, thank you to all of we have had a lot of donors. Thank you very much for that. Any references to Wagner's Ring Cycle? It's not quite that. I mean, the Ring Cycle as a whole is referenced by Tolkien, or echoed by Tolkien within his Legendarium, but there's not like that sort of one-for-one reference here. So Nerd Far Away saying, I only got 4 episodes into Foundation. I wonder if it's worth me getting a month's subscription. I don't know about Foundation. I didn't ever watch that. Who wins House of the Dragon or the Rings of Power? I mean, I've seen 2 episodes of each, so I think it's a bit too early to tell. What I will say is that absolutely well. I thought that was absolutely fantastic. As I say, I'm going to see how well Rings of Power translates onto the small screen before I make another sort of a judging one against the other. David Martinez saying, I've seen them. This is the first couple of episodes. Really enjoyed them. Some particularly impressive acting performances. Visuals were absolutely stunning. I agree with the pace comments. It felt a bit jumpy and rushed to me. Yeah, I mean, I don't think I disagree with anything there. The visuals being absolutely stunning. The budget for this, we talk about a lot. The budget is huge. And I think the thing which I've heard from a number of different angles, is that it's not so much that they threw a huge amount about this, therefore you should expect the best CGI. That's the way that we think of these things a lot of the time. You watch an Avengers movie or whatever, you're judging what the quality of CGI is. This isn't what this is that no expense was spared. If they got something wrong, they just did it again and paid the money for it. The audio recording, they got the best orchestra they could, they got the best composer they could, they got the best recording studio they could. There were no shortcuts. If you're looking at the CGI, I mean, the 13 months post-production on this was not just because they wanted to keep us all waiting. It was because they were throwing absolutely everything at it. They were making sure that if something was not right, they threw money at it until it was right. So that's where the money has gone. Things were redone. Let's see whether there's any more. Matt Savino saying, I hope that they don't show the Valar or Morgoth. Yeah, I'm not going to comment on that one. Tolkien Estate, this is Larry Q8. The Tolkien Estate gave Amazon permission to make a TV show about the Second Age. Can they give permission to make a show about a Fourth Age that Tolkien didn't write? Well, if it's set in Middle-earth, they hold the rights. Well, one thing I will say is that I've talked to a lot of people about who holds the rights to Tolkien. And some of those are people that you would expect to know where the rights are and who can do what, and even they are confused. This is an incredibly complex. The rights have been split up in lots of different ways. They were resold. Some of the rights were resold again recently, and the press release for that was talking about this could open up a new world of films being made about characters that we know, like Aragorn or Gandalf or whatever. I had thought that those film rights were already with someone like New Line, because we know that they're already making War of the Rohirrim. So I don't know. and I've actually, it happens every now and then. I actually have given up on trying to understand exactly where all these rights are to all these different things. Amazon have the rights to make this TV show, and that's about as far as I'm going to go. New Line have got the rights to make War of the Rohirrim, and if anything else comes along, great. I love Tolkien content. Not all of it is perfect, but I can't wait to see it. Mark Sheesa saying they took the look for Gil-galad from the Jackson movies where he appeared for about 3 seconds. I love that they kept Aeglos, that's his spear. So also another random thing about the rights, as I say, they're very complicated, is that they're not allowed to copy exactly what happened in the Peter Jackson films, so they can't go exactly for the same look for things. So you will find that there are subtle differences in elf architecture and sort of design fashions and things like that. So don't expect it to be exactly matching up, because at certain times they have not been able to. Andrew Case saying we can question and debate, let's do so in a civil, respectful manner. Yeah, absolutely. My moderators, so I always say to them, the idea here is to keep this a safe place for everyone. I encourage debate. I love discussion of these things. Any personal attacks, any abuse will get zapped straight away. The moderators have my absolute full permission to do that. Question from I can't read your username, but it says, I have a question. Why does Celebrimbor look like an old man when he is younger or the same age as Galadriel? It's a good question. Celebrimbor is one of the central characters in this, in the Second Age, so he's one of the most important characters, and he's one of the characters I and many other people have been most looking forward to seeing. We're not invited into all of the ins and outs of these decisions, but it is clear that they made at least one casting change, and that one of those casting changes was Celebrimbor. Because of the way they filmed this and because of COVID, they had a big break partway through. So the character that they've got is a guy called Charles Edward. The actor that they've got now is a guy called Charles Edwards. Now, my first reaction when seeing the stills of him was the same as probably most hardcore Tolkien fans. I wasn't convinced. He didn't look like my mental image of Celebrimbor. I am, from the very little I have seen, I am willing to give a bit of leeway here. He is an excellent actor. And I'm hoping this is one of those things where the reason that they cast him is because the audition was just so amazing that they couldn't say no. So that's my hope. I don't know. I haven't. It's not really a spoiler, but he's not in huge amounts of the 2 episodes that I saw. So I can't yet tell you whether that's the case, but that's what my hope is. Yes, he should be more of an age or looking of an age or younger than Galadriel. So the age difference doesn't quite work for me, but we'll see. Círdan. Is Círdan in the show? I love that character. I believe he's not in season 1. I've not heard, they've certainly not announced a casting for him, but hopefully he's going to be in later seasons. He's not to say he's not central is probably the wrong way of saying it. Círdan's role is in, as we know, his role, very broadly speaking, is to stay where he is and make ships. He's Círdan the shipwright. So if they're wanting to set the scene for this, then how we get from the position that I described to a position where the Rings of Power can be forged, he's not central to that bit of plot. I would be disappointed if we don't see him in the Second Age, because he is there and he is a very well-known and very wise figure. So hopefully he's going to be somebody who's brought in later seasons. In almost every show, there are characters who are introduced in later seasons. So I'm not too concerned about it at this stage. If he doesn't appear at all, I would be concerned. Reflective Rambling saying, can I shout out some positive healing vibes for Horses by Halachildown? I probably mispronounced that, but I hope you get better. So I don't know what the issue is, but I hope you get better soon. Clueless Fangirl asked, did anyone ask Galadriel where her husband is? Well, funny you should ask that. The OneRing.net did do an interview with some of the cast a while ago. And Clint, who's one of the main people there, his first question, for which he won a lot of respect for me, when you get the actors there and this is your one chance at asking them questions. The first question he asked them was, Galadriel, where's your husband? So the question has been asked for her. The response, I can't remember the exact words that she used, was keep watching, there are more seasons of this to come, which clearly implies that he's going to make an appearance in later seasons. So yes, people have asked that. Kelly Summers saying, you seemed more confident about House of the Dragon than Rings of Power a few weeks ago. Having seen 2 episodes of each without giving a rating, have your hopes or expectations shifted for either? Well, I will say, I mean, I don't know about hopes or expectations. I would say, and this probably has come across in my live streams and commentary on House of the Dragon, I think they knocked that one out of the park. I think that's really good, fantastic adaptation, and I was fully expecting that. And that was what I said beforehand, as I fully expect an excellent TV show, given everything that they gave us. And that is what I think we've got. And that, incidentally, in case you missed the news, A, it's been renewed for season 2. B, it's week 1 ratings, the viewings was huge. This was the highest debuting series for HBO ever. The biggest thing by a long way since they had House of the Dragon. And then thirdly, or C, I can't remember how I started that, but thirdly, the week 2 ratings, overnight ratings for week 2 of House of the Dragon went up. And that is incredibly rare in the world of TV, because what that means is incredibly good word of mouth. People watched it, they told other people, and they decided to watch it as well. So that is incredibly good news for House of the Dragon. They've renewed it for season 2, is the key thing here. It has been renewed for season 2. And I think we can now have a lot of confidence that some of those, not all, but some of those many other spin-offs that George R. R. Martin has mentioned that they've got in development will happen. So expect an announcement at some point in the not too distant future about them. So I think they're going to start filming season 2 of House of the Dragon either towards the end of this year or the beginning of next. So expect that to happen about summer 2024, maybe, something along those lines. With Rings of Power, as I say, I'm slightly withholding judgment until I see it on a small screen. But the first 2 episodes, actually, I'll tie this in with the question I had from Mara Lee. Hi there, Mara, saying, what do you think was the reason for the showrunners giving us 2 episodes to start with and then 1 episode each week thereafter? The way they filmed this, even forgetting about COVID for one moment, they always planned to film the first 2 episodes and then leave a gap of 5 months. They filmed 2 episodes, then they were going to leave a gap for 5 months, then they were going to film the other episodes. The reason why they wanted to treat this almost as an extended pilot, to set everything off, to set all of the different plot lines going, and then they could come back and start progressing each of those plot lines from that point. So that was the idea. The idea that they always had was to just do these two, treat it as an extended pilot, and they probably always planned on releasing the first two at the same time. So that's, I think, what's going on there. And so, Callie, to come back to your question, I'm waiting to see them on the small screen, and then I will make a judgment on that. Curtis Franks saying or asking, do the characters, particularly the elves, speak in an elevated or lyrical style? In the Jackson films, they do so consistently, and it is super noticeable and lovely. I want the same. Well, yes. So they had a, and I don't quite know exactly what her job title was, but a sort of a languages and dialect expert who was called Leith McPherson, who worked on this. And the showrunners I've heard talk about this as well. They were all very clear. Each of the different races of Middle-earth should not just have their own language, but have a different cadence of speech. So the elves should be speaking in, as you say, a much more sort of elevated, not just in a sort of slightly upper class English accent, sort of what we would call an RP accent, not just like that, but also with the longer words and the greater flow to what they're talking about. Now, I was encouraged. I didn't pay attention to this while I was watching those first two episodes, other than to note that this did seem to be the case. On one of the trailers, I think it was the main trailer, then it was noticeable that Gil-galad and Galadriel were talking in iambic meter, by which we mean the stress was on the offbeat, da 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 da, which is in the English language, that's the form of high poetry, classical poetry, if you like. This is where a lot of, if you read Shakespeare, when he does poetry, he often uses that kind of structure of iambic. And so to us, it feels quite elevated language. It's deliberate language that has a kind of musicality to it. That can be compared to the Harfords, say, who use a lot more simple language. They use a lot more metaphors to do with nature and what is around them. So yes, there a lot of thought went into trying to make these things different. And my first impression was that it worked. I'm reserving judgment also on the quality of the dialogue, if that makes sense, because I'm waiting to see a little bit further on what I feel about that. Okay, so I think Chris K NFL, is the soundtrack in the show as epic in the show as it is when I'm walking to the train station? Well, I don't know how epic it is walking to your train station, but if the walk to your train station is across misty mountains and through elven valleys, then yes, it works perfectly, is what I'm saying. It's yeah, one of my highlights of all of this. And Cloaked One, thank you for quoting me. Da 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 da. Robert 2022. So let's see. I think that's me caught up on the chat for the moment. Let's go to, so morally, the second part of that question you're asking is, how many episodes will there be in the first season? Do we know if there's going to be a second season? So in terms of the practicalities, there are 8 episodes. They are released on a weekly basis after the first 2 episodes here. For reasons I haven't quite understood, the timing of the release today is different, or overnight is different to the timing of the release for the other episodes. I think that's 3 hours later normally. So whereas for me, it's 2 a.m. for when this episode is going to be released. the following weeks it's going to be 5 a.m. So that's midnight Eastern time is when they're going to be released. I don't know why, but that's what it is. There are 8 episodes in this first season. I don't think that it's been officially renewed for the second season. They certainly haven't started filming or anything like that. But this is a commitment, a 5-season commitment from Amazon. I think it's fair to say that it would be something seismic if they decided not to go the full 5 seasons on this. They've spent so much money, and they've sunk so much money into this. Buying the rights for $250 million alone is huge. So I don't think it's officially been renewed, but I think we can safely assume that it will be. Creative branches. How many years do you think will pass from the first episode of The Rings of Power to the last episode of the whole series? 100 years between each season? ? If you were writing the show, how would you move the time forward, and what story would you tell? Okay, well, I'll cover the first bit of that first, which is what is happening on the show. Now, on the show, I talked about time contraction earlier. The whole thing is contracted in and squished. Now, exactly how squished it's going to be, I don't know yet. Given the pace of the first couple of episodes, I would assume that season 1 must take place over a few weeks or months or something, not huge amounts. Maybe they'll include a few breaks between seasons. Certainly, there are a lot of things that will have to happen. That will take time. I say will have to happen. I don't know. Maybe they'll write their way around these things, but certainly Sauron has to. The rings being forged will take a bit of time. Sauron has to build Barad-dûr. He has to build up an orc army. He has to invade Middle-earth a couple of times. These are things that will take time. So how much time are they going to actually leave them? My instinct is a few years. So maybe over the sort of the time which it takes them to film all of this in the end, and I guess they could probably film 5 seasons in 10 years if they're carrying on at the same sort of rate they're going at the moment. So maybe they'll say it's squished down into a decade. They haven't announced it, is the short answer, but it's going to be timeline contracted. Elendil looks middle-aged. I haven't heard how old he's supposed to be on the show, but he looks middle-aged, and certainly his son Isildur looks like he's in his 20s. So he will be there at the battle at the end of the Second Age, and so you'd expect leading the forces. So you expect, I don't know, not too long is the short answer. If I were writing the show, how would I move the time forward, and what story would I tell? Well, I think the thing is, I'm not a film writer, so I can free myself up from the constraints of what might or might not work on screen. If I had the Second Age to play with, I would probably make a very different kind of telling the legends, more of a sort of here's this story, and then an anthology series, I think we're calling them these days, which incidentally is what House of the Dragon is shaping up to be. But you tell the story of the forging of the Rings of Power, and then you tell the story of the rise and fall of Numenor. You tell the story of the Last Alliance, whatever it is. So you can just do, boom, 2 or 3 seasons here, 2 or 3 seasons there, 2 or 3 seasons there, and you can have new cast for that. So you don't have to worry about this whole, we're renewing our cast. So that's what I would do. I wouldn't try to tell the whole story. I would tell the significant moments within it, and then sort of have the huge jump in time, and that would allow the background stuff to still be happening. So Numenor can slowly rise and slowly decline. That's absolutely fine. You don't have to squish it all in. So if I ruled the world, that would be how I would tell this story. But I don't rule this world. I haven't been given however many hundreds of millions of dollars to make this. So we've got the thing we've got, and I'm still hoping. I mean, I'm very aware that a lot of what I say but this isn't what Tolkien wrote there. I'm hoping that regardless, this is going to be good, because I love these kinds of things. What I saw, I enjoyed. I'm actually genuinely full of hope for this show. I think that it's going to be excellent. Yeah, that's where we're at. So there will be niggle, and occasionally I will come out and say I don't like this thing because this doesn't fit with Tolkien, whatever. But ultimately, what matters to me is this a good story, well told, and is this supporting the feel of Tolkien's world? That's what I want. The themes that he found and made so important. Those are the things that I'm looking for. Let's have a quick show. The general look through the chat. General Grievous 19 says, I would think of doing a show about just one set of events, like the Exile of the Noldor, Beren and Luthien, Fall of Numenor. Yeah, I would love to do, like, the great stories of the First Age would be fantastic. I mean, a Beren and Luthien, or a Children of Húrin. I mean, that would be a hard watch, but Children of Húrin would make for a fantastic story. The Beebs Magoo saying Harfords weren't in that age. I did talk about that a little bit earlier in the stream. Tolkien doesn't explicitly talk about them, but the implication of what he says is that hobbits were descended from humans, probably. Therefore, we would expect there to be something there at some point. Mark Sheesa saying, my second age show would be building ships with Círdan. Guest stars include Eldarion, Gil-galad, Elrond, and others. Yeah, I mean, I would watch that. General Grievous also skeptical about Harfords and the wizard guy in the second age. They weren't supposed to be here. If by the wizard guy you're talking about Meteor Man, I've not talked about Meteor Man before. Meteor Man is the fan name. I should probably clarify. The official blurb has this person as the Stranger, and we see him in the trailers. So this is, again, no spoilers. There was that meteor that goes across the sky. All looks very ominous. Crashes into the ground. He gets discovered. Who is he? What's going on? He's an old man. This is deliberately being set up as a mystery. He's clearly not normal. Or not normal human, because, you know, normal humans don't crash land into the earth in meteors. Is he a wizard? That would certainly make sense. I have seen articles suggesting this is Gandalf. I hope it's not Gandalf. It shouldn't be Gandalf. There are two wizards that are there in the second age, the blue wizards. So perhaps one of them. Also, although I fear we may not see him, Glorfindel comes back to Middle-earth during the second age. For those who don't know who Glorfindel is, he's like the world's most epic elf. Costumes. Oh, it's Costume CO. Hi there, Heidi. For those who are fans of costumes and costume design and what they mean for a show and how they work for a show, I can think of no better place than go to Costume CO as a YouTube channel where I'm pretty sure she's covering both House of the Dragon and the Rings of Power, just looking at the costumes on that. So if you like that, please do go and check out Heidi. And she's a wonderful human being as well. Let's have a look. See, Mattia saying, I want the Fall of Gondolin. Yes, that's another one of those great stories of the First Age. How amazing would it be to have two intercutting scenes of Glorfindels and Ecthelion fighting Balrogs? That would be pretty amazing. Clayton Hosty saying, I wonder if it will include the appearance of the Blue Wizards in the Second Age. I really hope it will. I've not heard any hint of it yet, but I really hope they will. Tariq of Dol Amroth saying, Húrin's life, forget Turin, is too tragic. I'm not emotionally strong enough yet to see that. I understand. Hansi Muli saying, what hobbits descended from humans? Yeah, so this is, I mean, this is one of those things where Tolkien, in his writings, he took on this character. It's quite meta, we would probably now think of it, but he took on the character of himself within this world, being this academic, uncovering things about Middle-earth, and then he was collating them, editing them, and writing the stories. That was his sort of literary conceit, to the extent that when people wrote to him asking questions about Middle-earth, he often wrote back almost in that persona, saying things like, yes, well, I think that seems quite likely. Maybe we'll discover at some point where such and such is, or I certainly hope that that's the case, but I haven't found that out yet, or something along those lines. So he took that quite seriously. Now, while he was doing this, then he, in character, talked about the hobbits being probably descended from humans, so that's all from men. So that's where we get that from. The implication, if they are descended from them, then that means that, you know, at some point, I mean, they didn't just magically appear in the Third Age. They must have come from somewhere. So it's not written in anywhere that there were hobbits or proto-hobbits in the Second Age, but it's also not against what Tolkien wrote. It's just quite likely. So that's where we are at. Anonymous, wow, just donated $149. Thank you so much, whoever you are. That is incredibly generous. I'm hugely grateful. And the People's Profiles is also in the chat. People's Profiles, a big shout out to People's Profiles, who I have done a collaboration with. If you want excellent biographies of key figures in history, then do go and check out their channel. They produce quite regularly and quite long, an hour or so, biographies of key people, and I collaborated with them on a biography of Tolkien, which we're going to be releasing in two forms: a longer form over on their channel, which I think is coming out, you have to correct me, People's Profiles, I think you said you were going to bring it out today/tomorrow. Mine will be coming out tomorrow/the day after. Mine's going to be a condensed version. So he's provided the history, I've provided the Tolkien lore. We've done it together. I've done the sort of the narration, and I hope you really like it. It should be fantastic. But yeah, do please go and check out the People Profiles. Let's have a quick. Tonight, the People Profiles saying we are releasing tonight. Excellent. So go and check that out. Cafe Nero saying I've enjoyed many of People Profiles videos yet. So that's fantastic. Let's have a quick flick through. Well, actually, let's go back to questions from my patrons. Zvibo saying, hi, Robert. I'm both excited and concerned for the Rings of Power. I don't think the build-up has been that well handled by Amazon, but I'm keeping my fingers crossed for the show itself. Are you concerned that Amazon has placed unrealistic expectations for how big the show will be? I'm worried that it won't be given a fair chance unless it is the biggest thing on the planet right from the off, which seems unrealistic no matter how big it is, or how good it might be. So I think what I will say first of all is, in terms of the build up, I mean, this is in many ways it's old news now, because, you know, how Amazon promoted this show before it came out doesn't matter as much as what the show's actually like when it does come out. But I've not been a massive fan of how they did this. It's been, to my mind, quite scattergun. And sometimes they have got it very right, and sometimes, in my mind, they've got it very wrong. But that has not engendered belief. I think it's probably fair, particularly if you compare that to something like House of the Dragon, that I think did a fantastic job of turning an entire fandom from quite a depressed place after season 8 of Game of Thrones to genuinely excited and looking forward to it. I don't think that that's what has happened with the Rings of Power. I think that there is a sense among the majority of, I'm going to give this a go, and I hope it's good. But the idea that this is going to be the best show ever, I mean, I think that is too lofty a goal. I think the most expensive show ever, definitely. But whether it's going to be the best or greatest, I'd be happy with very good. I think that's a realistic thing to be aiming for. Let's go have a quick check through the chat. Last Cramp, I wonder most of all how they will condense all the kings and queens of Numenor. I believe they will just cut out some, but I really do hope we at least get to see Elros. Well, I think they have to cut out some. It's the short answer. I can't see any other way around this. If they've condensed 2,500 years down into one lifetime, yeah, they have to. And they've started, as well as having Elendil and Isildur, they've started with Pharazôn and Miriel alive, who this is the last generation of Numenorian rulers. So either they've shortened the lifespan of all of the previous ones, or they've cut some out, or probably more likely they fudged it entirely by not mentioning it. That seems to be where we're at. In terms of Elros, this is Elrond's brother. For those who don't know, Elrond, we talk of him as being Elrond the Half-Elven. His ancestry is a little bit more complicated than that, but he and his brother, twin brother Elros, were given the choice at the beginning of the Second Age. They were given the choice: do you wish to live the life of an elf or the life of a human? Elrond, we know, chose the life of an elf. Elros chose the life of a human. Elros went off to become the first king of Numenor, and he lived a good long life for a human, but it was a mortal life. Will we get to see him? Well, he and the other early kings and queens of Numenor are in the history books as far as this show is concerned. This show is effectively coming in around the year 1000 of the Second Age. So are we going to meet him? Only a flashback if we do. Perhaps Elrond will have some memories or something like that. Leslie saying hello, new subscriber, welcome. I don't know why I've just found you recently. I love House of the Dragon. I'm on the fence about how excited I am about this show. I think that's fair. I think that, as I say, I think a lot of people are. Do you voice audiobooks? Not audiobooks specifically, but this does, thank you very much, give me the opportunity to quickly refer you onto my second channel, which is The Well Told Tale. The Well Told Tale is effectively my audiobook channel. I do audio narrations of the greatest science fiction and fantasy stories ever written. The absolute classics in my eyes. We've got Cthulhu, we've got Conan, we've got War of the Worlds, Frankenstein. We've got all of the great classics of the genre. I'm there narrating. So if you like that, it's simply just me reading books. And if that works for you, go and check out The Well Told Tale. But thank you very much for those very kind comments. Kugelbit saying, I didn't really feel like Peter Jackson captured the feel of the books. I think the movies are essentially a different genre of fiction, mostly focused on action with limited action in the books. Yeah, I mean, I know what you mean. I think the feel is very important. The feel, and it's very subjective as well, isn't it? It's that something might feel right to me, but feel wrong to somebody else. But I would agree completely that when you take something from page and adapt it to screen, that does change what is needed. And some of the changes, and this is true for House of the Dragon, Rings of Power, making the Lord of the Rings into films, everything, some changes are necessary. That they just have to happen. You can't read inside somebody's mind when you're showing something on TV, and you do have to show things that may not be written down in the text. So you do have to make some changes. The feel, for me, I thought the feel was right for the Peter Jackson films. I agree that they certainly made, particularly when they got to the Hobbit, it was a lot more action focused. I'm not as big a fan of the Hobbit movies as I was of the Lord of the Rings films, but they are more actiony, and and they cut out a lot of the sort of more detailed conversations because they need to keep the pace up. So I understand that the Council of Elrond in the books is quite a big sprawling affair with many breaks for people to sing songs and the like. That's not what happened on film. I still think it's quite good, but it isn't necessarily quite a condensed version. Seth Rich saying fans don't care if you change things as long as it's good. I think I sort of agree to the extent that I also think that the vast majority of fans don't know if things have been changed. I could get very worked up about changes that I see to, I don't know, dwarf culture or something like that. But the vast majority of people don't know what it is. They just see dwarves and then decide if they enjoy what's happening with the dwarves. That's it. So I think we sometimes place, those of us who are very caught up in this, we place too much emphasis on whether something is consistent with what's in the books when trying to understand whether people generally will like it. Kenny77 saying, I like what Philippa Boyens said about the cuts. Nobody says they didn't meet Tom Bombadil. We just don't see it. Yeah, I mean, that's a workaround, I guess. We should, well, we always talk about Tom Bombadil here. And for those who are wondering, there is no specific reason why we should see Tom Bombadil in the Rings of Power, but I, for one, would love him to have a cameo, perhaps in the very last scene of the very last episode, and I hereby offer up my services in the background. No speaking line, no lines to speak, just me in some very bright blue and yellow clothes dancing in the background. That's my open offer, and I'm going to keep on pushing that one until it gets accepted by the showrunners. And Chris K NFL saying the fact Tom Bombadil always appears in a Robert live stream is very on brand for the character of Tom Bombadil. It absolutely is. That's Sky asking, is there anything I should read or watch before tonight? Fandom noob. I mean, you don't need to watch anything. I would say for somebody who's coming into this fresh, they do a reasonable job of setting the groundwork. If you've got an idea roughly about, I mean, everyone's got a sort of a cultural idea about Middle-earth at the very least, elves, dwarves, orcs, humans, then I don't think there's anything you need to. If you want to, by all means do. There's plenty out there, but I don't think you need to if you're completely new. Mark Shees is saying, what do you mean no lines to speak? You'll have to sing the song again. If the only way I can get onto this is by singing the song again, I will happily do that. Right, let's Kane Shamsa saying, how many minutes left for the Rings of Power? It is on appearing in 2 3/4 hours. So feel free to do the maths for that. I'm not going to go all the way up to when this happens. So do not worry about that. You'll have enough time to have a cup of tea, walk a dog, or whatever you wish to do. Let's get to a question which kind of follows on actually from what we've just been talking about. 444 saying, I'm still afraid that Lord of the Rings, The Rings of Power will be closer to the Hobbit trilogy than the Lord of the Rings trilogy. So visually astonishing, but nothing you want to rewatch. I really want to be mistaken here. I also, well, let's just cover that one off. I think that there will be some kind of visual nods is probably the wrong way to say, but visual echoes of the Hobbit films. But my impression was that the breadth of the landscapes and the vision seems a whole lot more close to the Jackson original Lord of the Rings trilogy. I wonder why the Rings of Power faced enormous backlash. What went wrong? Almost everything I saw from the showrunners sounds promising. Many involved in the production names as well. Is this weak marketing? Forgettable trailers? Is it a lack of presence of a living author who can comment on the series, or something not directly related to the series itself, like distrust of big corporations, etc.? I think there's a lot of this. I think the first thing to try and get a sense of perspective on this, there has been some backlash against this, but I've never had the impression that it's overwhelming. I think just the vast majority of people have only recently become aware that there is even such a thing as a new Lord of the Rings TV show, and the impression from most of those people will, I'll give it a go, see what happens. So, yes, there are certainly some people who are avidly against this, but I don't think that's ever reached overwhelming levels. Certainly from what I've seen. You say almost everything I saw from the showrunners sounds promising. I would agree that the vast majority, I would say, of what the showrunners have said has been very promising, very respectful of Tolkien and the lore. Marketing and things I've already talked about. I think the distrust of big corporations is definitely there. I think Amazon, we all know Amazon, and it's not always got the best of reputations. Quite a lot of that is justified. I will very happily call them out on a huge amount of things. I know they're improving on some things, but certainly the workers' rights issues, the environmental issues, lots of things, the impact on small business and booksellers. There's a lot that I can critique about Amazon as a whole, and I think that all of us have got a lot of that kind of feeling in us, and so this is from Amazon doesn't help. They've certainly not got the kudos to someone like HBO in terms of making great TV shows. To be fair, a couple of the recent ones, The Boys and Good Omens, I've loved both of them, but they've not got that long track record. So I think there's definitely an element of all of that there. I'm trying not to focus on it too much, because that isn't about what we're here. We're here to talk about the Lord of the Rings, and I hope that the show is great, and I'm really looking forward to it. Gerald Grievous 19 saying, I think one of the reasons is that Tolkien fans really care about the lore, especially since the whole world has only one author, unlike, let's say, Marvel or even Star Wars. Yeah, Tolkien fans do really care about the lore. AW saying attended the fan screening yesterday. As I say, there are lots of people have seen this already with the fan screenings. There's no need to read up on Middle-earth history to enjoy the show. One can brush up on Numenor's story to know what to expect, but it's not necessary. Yeah, absolutely. You can. I would agree with that completely. Clayton Hosty saying Gandalf encountering Sauron and Dol Guldur was a well-done part of the Hobbit movies. Yeah, I really enjoyed those bits that they added in, because we don't actually see it in the Hobbit, but they sort of added it in from stuff that we know from elsewhere. OCE Pedal saying all art is subjective. What matters is to one doesn't to another. And I had a friend who walked out after they said you shall be the Fellowship of the Ring, because he thought that was the end of the movie. Yeah, I can understand that. I had a friend who walked out of the cave troll moment just because they found it too scary. That's fine. Morning Throners saying huge Song of Ice and Fire fan, reading Fellowship for the first time, one chapter in and already seeing so many things George referenced, Drogo Baggins, Bywater in the Shire, and so on. Yes, so this is interesting. So George R. Martin definitely gets lots of inspiration there. You will find, when you start digging deeper, you will find references to Tyrion. You will find, I think my favorite, if you're a huge Song of Ice and Fire fan, is you'll be aware of Arthur Dane, and that is almost certainly a reference to Arthur Dine, which is spelt. You would phonetically perhaps read it and think it was pronounced Arthur Dane, which is in the background to the Lord of the Rings. But anyway, yes, there's a lot there. Although, interestingly, one of my collaborators, friends of the channel, History of Westeros, did an interview with George R.R. Martin. I talked about it on a live stream quite recently with Aziz. He specifically asked George R.R. Martin about a chapter in forget which one, it might be in Storm of Swords, when Bran is at the wall at the Night Fort, and Aziz and I co-wrote a video which was going through all of the huge references from that across to the Lord of the Rings. I mean, they are all over the place. That you get pushing something down a well, you get something coming up, well, a character gets stabbed with a spear, everyone thinks that this is the end, they're dead, but it turns out underneath they've got some chain mail on. Lots of these kind of references, and Aziz put this to George R. Martin. He said, that wasn't conscious. So a lot of this is very much kind of subconscious, coming from George R. Martin, because he reads the books every year. He is a huge Tolkien fan, George R. Martin. Incidentally, History of Westeros have also just recorded, I've not watched it yet, but I'm sure it's excellent. They've just recorded a conversation with Ryan Condal, the showrunner for House of the Dragon. So if you're interested in that, please do go and check out their channel. Matthias saying or asking, will I do these preview streams with guests in the upcoming weeks as you do for House of the Dragon? Yes, that's definitely the plan. I will, from next week, the idea is I'm going to have on some various guests. So do let me know if you're watching this back a little bit later. Let me know down in the comments if there's anyone in particular you'd like me to be inviting on. We've got, I don't know what, we've got 6 weeks of this as after this. So I've got a few different guests I can have on. Andrew Kay saying the answer from George R. R. Martin about borrowing or paying homage to other works and even echoes between characters in his own universe, often not being intentional, was quite surprising. Yeah, absolutely. It certainly caught History of Westeros by surprise. Although Morning Throne is humbly suggesting that perhaps George R. R. Martin was playing with them. He didn't look like he was, to be honest, but I don't know. He has got quite an impish sense of humor sometimes, George R. R. Martin, it has to be said. Okay, let's go to a question from George R. Tolkien, saying, salutations, Robert. Salutations to you too. I'm excited for you that you got to be at the premiere, a little jealous, but ultimately happy because this means you'll be well informed for the live stream. Yeah, it was a really exciting experience. I wanted to ask you, since this is taking place in the Second Age, do you think we will get to see one of the three, if not all three, of the Silmarils at some point? I'm not entirely sure where they would be at this point in the story. Thank you. Okay, so the Silmarils, for those who are unaware, these are three majestic jewels that are not just beautiful in and of themselves, but they capture the light of the two trees of Valinor, which is a huge plot point within the early years of Tolkien's Legendarium, and they are hallowed by the Valar. These are amazing. They get stolen by Morgoth, and when the two trees are destroyed, then they have the only last remaining of the light from the two trees of Valinor. And this is pure, holy, life-giving light. This is a treasure beyond measure. And Morgoth has them, and this causes a huge amount of the problems that we get in the First Age, because Feanor and calls his people and leads his people over to Middle-earth, getting his sons to be swearing this oath that they will not rest until they get the Silmarils back. And if anyone else has them, they'll get them from them. And this oath causes so much trouble in the First Age. Hence the Silmarillion. This is all the Quintessilmarillion, this central part of the Silmarillion, is all about the implications, the bigger, wider implications of this theft, basically, and the stories that come off from that. At the end of that First Age, there were 3 of these. At the end of the First Age, the first one, we know what happened, because this is the one that Beren the Luthien stole. It got passed down a couple of generations and ended up with Eärendil and Elwing. Eärendil was the character who went off and managed to get the Valar to come and save Middle-earth, ending the Second Age. Eärendil, incidentally, is Elrond and Elros's father. Now, he ends up in the heavens. The Silmaril attached to his forehead. He goes across the skies with this Silmaril, and it is a star. And this is sort of showing this point at which we talk about or Tolkien talks about the Elder Days as being these parts of his history of his world that are almost mythological because they're so far back in time. And this is the hinge point here, is that Elrond and Elros's father is literally a star up in heaven. They, however, are these grounded characters. Elrond, we know about Elros, the first king of men on Numenor. They are taking this story forward into a much more grounded kind of world. So that's the first Silmaril, up in the heavens. Are we going to see that one? I mean, it's not coming back down. We know it's up there all the way through to the Third Age. But will they at some point have a character, maybe even Elrond himself, looking up to the sky and seeing that star? I hope so. That would be fantastic if they do something like that. I don't know. There's no particular plot point to it. It had a plot point right at the very beginning of the Second Age. It was following that star that took Elros and his people to Numenor, where they could found their new island kingdom, but not during the rest of the Second Age. So I hope that we see it, but it's not important. The other 2, one gets thrown into the deeps of the sea. Are we going to see that? I hope not. The third one gets thrown into the deeps of the earth, into the pits of fire and the deeps of the earth. Are we going to see that again? I hope not. The reason why I hope not is because if either of them do appear in any meaningful way in this story, they should have appeared in some meaningful way in Tolkien's writings. Because they're so big, they're so important. There's nothing here that, Tolkien made them such a central part of his First Age that for them to reappear in the Second Age would be a massive thing. Pardon me. Right, so the third Silmaril of the 3, the one that went into the earth, that one is the one that is most often speculated on within the fandom, is probably fair to say. So that some people have said maybe this is the Arkenstone. I don't think it is the Arkenstone for a number of reasons. I did a video about that, but I'm pretty sure it isn't. And there are a number of other theories out there. So if one of them does appear, it probably would be that one, but I hope not. I really hope not. It's because if it plays any major part, that Tolkien would have mentioned it. Okay. Kieran Grant's saying, yeah, that's a serious cough. It was. I apologize. That caught me slightly by surprise, that one. Moderators, just a very quick shout out. You do an amazing job. Thank you so much. I know that today there have been a few comments that you've been deleting. If you are watching this and you're enjoying the chat, please thank the moderators, because they do a fantastic job. Just give them a little bit of love. I would hugely appreciate that. Electric Angel, does Amazon have the rights to the Silmarils? Well, it doesn't have the rights to the Silmarillion, but the Silmarils are certainly mentioned elsewhere, so the concept of them is definitely right. And the other thing I should probably say about the rights, as this gets very complicated, but the showrunners were in constant contact with the Tolkien estate through this process, which means that, as with Peter Jackson when he was doing his films, there has been a degree, as I understand, a degree of sort of negotiation is probably the best way of saying it, about some things, because what the Tolkien estate do not want is a situation where, because Amazon don't have the rights to do a certain thing, they then have to change something else that is absolutely central to Tolkien's world simply because they haven't got the rights to that other thing. So they have gone through this process of constantly talking, making sure that they can tell a story. Now, again, whether this is a story we like at the end of the day, we will decide once we've seen this. But there are some things that you say, do they have the rights to this specific thing? On specific things, then they may well have negotiated, is the point I'm trying to make there. There's part in the so again, I can't read your username. Apologies, saying there's a part in the Silmarillion where Manwë is described as Melkor's brother or twin, and they are equal in power. But Melkor always feared Tulkas. So is Tulkas the most powerful Valar? No, Morgoth is the most powerful, but Tulkas is the warrior, so he's more specialized. Lots of moderators, lots of love for the moderators, which is excellent. Let's go with a question from Mara Lee saying, I know that familiar characters like Gandalf don't come into the story until The Hobbit and the Lord of the Rings trilogy, but do you think we will see any wizard-like characters in the show? I hope so. I touched on this a bit earlier. I hope we get to see the blue wizards. Now, this is because they've always been enigmatic, and those of us who study these things for a long time, it's really quite frustrating because Tolkien devotes most of his stories and background to the bit of Middle-earth that we know about, the bits around, to the west of the Misty Mountains and just to the east and then south down into Gondor, across into Mordor. But in the other bits, it's a lot vaguer. So when we hear about some things that happen over in those areas, our ears kind of prick up and go, okay, well, what's going on there? And we get told that the two blue wizards, when the 5 wizards came, Gandalf, Saruman, Radagast, and the two blue wizards headed off east. Saruman went with them initially, but they headed off east. And we get a few fragments from Tolkien about what they were doing. And they were there earlier in the Second Age as well, and they were doing good work there. So I'd love to see them. I think, I think that's the kind of characters that I'd love to see fleshed out, even if it's only in the background, even if it's only hearing reports of some old men doing good work or something. I'd love for that to get name checked. So hopefully, yes, I really hope that we don't get any of the other 3, Gandalf, Saruman, or Radagast. If they did come, this would be a matter of them wanting them to be in there, and it's not against Tolkien, what Tolkien wrote, but it's, well, let's hope that they don't do that. That's it's my general view on this. Having a quick flick through the chat. Again, thank you very much for the people who've been donating. We're a bit over $2,000 now, so thank you so much. I'd love any more if you're watching this and if you're appreciating it. What I'm asking is if you show your appreciation by donating, if you are able, that would be excellent. Quick flick through. Empress saying, so D&D made me know more about this story than ever I thought possible. Thank you for a fun pre-show. Well, you're very welcome. If you're talking about Dungeons and Dragons, I assume rather than Dan and Dave, the showrunners of Game of Thrones. So the Dungeons and Dragons has got quite a good history with the Lord of the Rings because it was developed back in the 1970s, just when the Lord of the Rings was becoming this huge phenomenon, really. And a lot of what they did was based on this, of the world, the feel that was there from Tolkien. So everything that we know about what an elf is like, what a dwarf is like, what a hobbit is like, what a dragon is like, that fed straight and direct into Dungeons and Dragons. Even some of the things like dwarves and elves don't get on. There's such a thing as dark elves. That all of these kind of things, they all map across. They had to change some things. They weren't allowed to use the word hobbit, so they changed it to halfling. But Dungeons and Dragons and so many of the high fantasy stories that were written around that time, I wouldn't say a rip-off of Tolkien's work, but they were so heavily influenced. You can see them, you can see the lines of influence all the way through. Let's go. So AW saying Blue Wizards arrived in the Second Age. Yes, they did. Okay, let's go to a question from Martin Sierstrand saying, hello, Robert. Hello. One thing that has bothered me a bit about Tolkien's Legendarium is that when determining what race a specific character is, only the father's race seems to count most of the time. And then you give a few different examples of this. Fingolfin was classified as a Noldo elf, actually 50% Noldo, 50% Vanya. Galadriel classified as Noldo, actually 25% Noldo, 25% Vanya, 25% Felmary, and so on. So yes, isn't this a bit weird? After all, inheritance does not work that way, as both parents affect what someone becomes, especially for Luthien, I deem, as in her case, the main part of the potency she does display probably comes from Melian, her Maya mother. Yeah, so I entirely understand the point here. So I think there's two elements to it. The who a person is, that they do get some of who they are from their ancestry. So you get Elrond and Elros were called half-elven. They in fact actually had bits of ancestry going all the way back up to Melian the Maya as well. So they had a bit of that in there too. And so Tolkien does very much have this as the idea that who you are personally is a product of your ancestors. But in terms of what you are classified as, for want of a better name, then that is more often than not where your father comes from in Tolkien's world. Now, this is, I suspect, probably, as Tolkien tried his very best not to be influenced by his own culture and world experiences, but obviously we all are to a greater or lesser extent. Within Tolkien's world, then very much this was the case, that the name you would have comes from your father's side. The woman would marry the man and she would give up her name and she would take on the name of the man, and then the children would have the man's surname. So that is very much the world that he came from. And I think that is what, broadly speaking, he is doing here with people being classified as one type of elf or another type of elf predominantly through the male line. Let's go to question from Reflective Rambling saying, I believe Ulmo is a common theme. There have been a few theory videos in it. I believe Voice of Geekdom or Robert himself put out a good one. I don't know what that was responding to, but Ulmo is the Valar that... in fact, I've just spotted the question. Robert, I was listening to Lord of the Rings earlier, and the Council of Elrond, Boromir, and Faramir both have a dream, like they were told to go to Rivendell. Who sent hints through both their dreams. So yes, Ulmo is the favourite. They have this dream, but by the river, by the banks of the river Anduin. Ulmo is the Valar who is the Valar of the sea, and the Lord of Waters. So it kind of makes sense if it's him. Ulmo also is the Valar who never gives up on the children of Iluvatar, elves and humans, even when all of the others were just... Tolkien never says it's... Well, he does once or twice, turned their backs on elves and humans. Ulmo never does. And we see him all the way through the Silmarillion, just sort of like popping up, giving people dreams, prodding them in one way or another. So this is entirely within character for him to do. If it wasn't him, perhaps it came from Manwë or even Iluvatar himself. But it's... That dream did come from somewhere, because it was very clear that this was necessary for one of them to be going up to Rivendell. Let's go... Oh, People Profiles is back. Quick question. Will the Witch King appear in later Amazon series 4 or 5? Sorry if someone has asked it. No, they have not asked this. So the Witch King and the other Nazgul, they came into being in the Second Age. They as we know, they were given the 9 rings, and so Sauron got them. They were forged. He goes away, forges the one ring, which is supposed to give him control over everybody wearing those other rings, but the elves go, I see what you're doing there, and take off the rings. So he decides, oh, well, I'll just go and invade. He goes and invades, gets the rings that were made, except for the 3 elven rings, which they managed to smuggle out. So he then divides up the other ones, 9 for humans, 7 for dwarves, done. The 9 that go to humans, we know where 4 of them went. 3 of them went to Númenórean lords. 1 of them went to someone called Khamûl the Easterling, which implies he comes from the east of Middle-earth. Now, will we see those rings being given out? Almost certainly in this show. Will we see those characters become corrupted and turn into Nazgul? Almost certainly in this show. Will they, at the end, completely fade and become the Nazgul proper? Again, almost certainly, because that's just too good a bit of storyline not to do. Now, how they will have to squish that down in the timeline. When is that going to happen? I don't know. If this is 5 seasons, then you would expect that season 1, if it's taking it up to a bit before the forging of the Rings of Power, season 2 you would expect is the actual forging and then the aftermath. So maybe they get distributed at the end of season 2. I don't know. Depends on the speed they have to go through. But season 3, maybe season 4, is when we would sort of see this sort of corruption and emerging Nazgul from this. But they may play fast and loose with the timeline. I don't know. But that's we will almost certainly see them. Let's Matt Stoker, this is someone else who saw one of the showings in cinemas, saying, I saw it in theaters last night, visually stunning. I'm reserving judgment on the story and characters until the entire season is finished. Yeah, again, I don't think I would disagree with that. I think everyone says this is visually stunning. So if you had concerns about how it looks, then I think pretty much everyone has said that. And in terms of reserving judgment on the story and characters, I mean, I think I'm with you, is that I don't know whether I'll wait until the season is finished as a whole. We didn't have enough time to really get into, because it's moving about in so many different places, we didn't get enough time really to develop any of these characters enough, or the stories enough to to let them breathe. So maybe we need to give that another kind of a couple of episodes or something. Let's people profile saying it would be great to see Angmar and his wars. Yeah, so that's a Third Age thing. So the Witch King, the title "The Witch King of Angmar" comes from when, in the Third Age, after Sauron's had the ring cut from his finger, and he kind of disappears from the scene for a while. The Witch King re-emerges. They don't know it's the Witch King at the time, but he re-emerges up in Angmar, which is just to the north of the Misty Mountains, and he raises an army, and he basically causes huge amounts of havoc in the north of Middle-earth, and that's when he gets his name, the Witch King of Angmar, because that almost certainly wasn't his name beforehand, leaving open the option that he could be a Númenórean or someone else, but we should see him in this series. Let's just having a quick click through. I'll go to a question from one of my patrons. This is Catherine Fursith saying, hi Robert, the series seems to put a lot of emphasis on the dwarves of the kingdom of Khazad-dûm. Do you think we will see some of the other dwarf kingdoms? How important were they in the history of the Second Age? Thanks. So there are 7 dwarf tribes or nations that we know about. The central, pardon me, one moment. The central one that we read most about are Durin's folk, or the Longbeards, that in the Second Age they're based in Khazad-dûm. There are 2 others who are off in the Blue Mountains to the far west. If you imagine the map of Middle-earth, they were off in the far west of Middle-earth. Now they largely get wiped out in the First Age. Some remnants head off and actually join the dwarves in Khazad-dûm. So that's what happens there. So we may well see some of them. Whether they will go try to show any differences, I don't know. But that's where some of them are. And Tolkien's not 100% clear, but it seems that there may well have been some who remained a sort of a hardcore or something like that. Certainly when you get all the way forward to The Hobbit, that's where for a time Thorin and co head off all the way over to the the Blue Mountains, which is why, incidentally, they're traveling through the Shire, and why Gandalf ran into Thorin, because he's heading off towards the Blue Mountains. So those are 3 of the tribes. The other 4 tribes are off to the south and east, and we don't really read much about them. Now, we know that some of those took part in the last alliance of elves and men, so there were some dwarves involved there. We know that some of them migrated across because the south and east became Sauron's stronghold, and so some of them migrated up again into Khazad-dûm, which was this great central stronghold for the dwarves. Some of them, by implication, got corrupted by Sauron. We don't really meet any of these at all, but some of them by implication do. So that's the fates. My guess is that they probably won't get into that level of detail. We're just going to have Khazad-dûm itself, and we'll have the dwarves who are there, and they won't go into, well, which are you, a Longbeard? Are you, another one of the tribes? I don't think they'll break it down to that level of detail. Raphael Brett saying, if visually stunning is the only upside mentioned, it's a bad piece of film. Like any Marvel cash grab is visually stunning. If it were the only upside mentioned, I would agree. But it's not the only upside mentioned. Not defending it. I'm just trying to summarize what people have said. I would say the other thing that almost everyone has said, is the music. I've not seen anyone searching my brain here. No, I've not seen anyone say that they don't like the music, and almost everyone has said that they think the music is really good. And there are other things some people have said that they like, so it's not the only thing. But being visually stunning is good in my book. So, but watch it, find out, make your own mind up. Ethan Parker saying, I just hope this isn't going to be a case of another great intellectual property being slowly destroyed. I truly hope the show is good, but at this point my expectations couldn't be lower. Well, yeah, I mean, I hear a few. I'm always open to all sides of this. I also hope that this isn't and what did you say? Another great intellectual property being slowly destroyed. My general feel is that when you get to be as old as I am, you've seen lots of different, or experienced lots of different versions of Middle Earth, adaptations of Middle Earth. And yes, we've got the Peter Jackson Lord of the Rings films, we've got the Peter Jackson Hobbit films. Some may remember the Rankin Bass stuff earlier than that. I grew up listening to the BBC radio adaptation, which I still rank as probably the finest of all the adaptations that I've ever encountered. There are the video games, not just the Shadow of Mordor ones, but there's also the sort of the, what were they called, the War Middle Earth something or other. Anyway, there's a lot of video games, so there are lots of different adaptations we've had over time. My take is the book's still there, and the book is always going to be there, and so my love for the book is never going to be diminished, regardless of what appears on the screen in front of me. So I don't feel that that's threatened in any way. I think it's wonderful that people want to make adaptations of it, and I just hope that each adaptation is good. So I personally, I don't quite buy into the idea of something being destroyed or diminished by a bad adaptation, in the same way that I'm sure we've all had songs that we love that have had cover versions that we hate. That doesn't diminish the original song. That the original song is still there, and you can go back to it anytime. But occasionally you get a cover version of a song that is astonishingly good, and you go, you know what? That's a new way of looking at this. So that's what my hope is that we're going to have the equivalent of a great cover version of a great song. But even if it's a terrible cover version, the original is still there. That's my general take on this. So I don't particularly buy into the idea that Tolkien's work is threatened in any way by bad adaptations. Dave Cat saying, farewell friends, my Dungeons and Dragons nerd council is gathering momentarily. Well, enjoy your Dungeons and Dragons. Beesman, member of the members club here, saying nothing makes good friends for life quicker than a good campaign or a couple of nights of board games. Yeah, absolutely. I'm a huge fan of myself. Mint and Chip saying, think of it like Star Wars. There will always be the originals, but the newer movies don't demise or diminish the originals, just add to them, regardless of how bad the Clone Wars was. I mean, I didn't mind Clone Wars. It was that was all right, but I agree with your point. John B saying, yeah, but how many people stopped watching Game of Thrones because of season 8? Well, there wasn't anything after season 8 is probably the pithy response, but I think that the love for Game of Thrones, I think the point I'm trying to make with that is that the love for Game of Thrones, and maybe you put a little winky emoji after this, so maybe this is the point you're trying to make, the love for Game of Thrones is still there, as shown by the massive outpouring of love for House of the Dragon. So I don't think season 8 did not diminish Game of Thrones. It was just meant that people were waiting for the next great thing. Raphael Brett, what can you say about the language style? Is it similar to the books, or is it dumbed down modern English like in late Game of Thrones? I did talk about this a little bit higher in the live stream, so I'm not going to repeat what I said there. I think what I could add here is one thing that I've heard the showrunners say is that they used only the vocabulary that Tolkien used, which is a small point, but I think it's quite, to add to the stuff I said earlier, it's a small point, but I think it's quite insightful that there is nothing that is new or popularized this side of the last 70 years is included in this. Everything that is there has a certain cadence of the early to mid 20th century at the latest, and some of it feels even more sort of elevated and old than that. So the language usage is not modern English. The language usage is Tolkien time English. That's a separate point, I think, to the quality of dialogue. That I'm going to wait and make a judgment call on later, but a deliberate and specific effort has been made to make sure that this is not modern language. Edmundo Dominguez saying adaptations, good or bad, come and go, but the original work stands. Yes, absolutely, I agree completely. Shabba 305, when is the release time of The Rings of Power first 2 episodes? It is in just over, by my computer clock here, just over 2 hours from now. First episode 1 is, Kieran Grant says episode 1 is on my Amazon Prime right now. Guess I'll be watching it. Okay, so if perhaps they've been dropping. If they have, perhaps some people can confirm it, and if so, then I will happily jump over this live stream and let everybody watch the show. But let me go to Deep 64 Blue. What elements of the show have most upset die-hard Tolkien fans, and do they have a point in your opinion? I think that there's a couple of things here I'd want to sort of pick up on. Upset and die-hard Tolkien fans. The thing that I would say about die-hard Tolkien fans, I can only speak for the fandom that I know, which tends to include the sort of the content creators that are out there, academics, the people who've been involved at the heart of the Tolkien fandom for a long period of time. That is not the entirety of the Tolkien fandom by any stretch of the imagination. I would say nothing has come up that I've seen that has upset people. I think most of that group of people are broadly of the same opinion that I've just talked about with sort of cover versions. We've still got the originals. They might not like what this massive budget thing is doing, but I don't. For that group of people, the diehards, I think that there's no, Tolkien will be spinning in his grave. They've been through all the same series of adaptations that I have, that we all have. They've seen lots of things that I hugely agree with. There are lots of people out there who are still up in arms about what happened to Faramir's character, or pointing out that Sam would never leave Frodo, which is what happened in the Peter Jackson films. So that kind of thing will always be there, but I don't think upset is the right word. But to take the spirit of what you're saying, in terms of what is it that those kind of diehard fans that I've seen are most concerned about, it's not the sort of the fire and fury comments that we often see on the internet. It's not about whether Galadriel is a warrior, or whether I don't know, whether the elves have short hair or something like that. That's not the kind of thing that most of this kind of group get worked up about, for two reasons, some of which is that there is an actual reasonable amount of support for some of these things when you actually start digging into Tolkien's work. The portrayal of Galadriel, for example, I've not seen all of it, obviously, but I've seen the first 2 episodes. The idea that Galadriel is a warrior woman is entirely in keeping with Tolkien's description of her being of Amazon disposition. So I don't have a problem with that per se, and I don't think many other sort of Tolkien scholars do either. And a lot of this other kind of surface stuff, I think most people kind of go, okay, it's not actually what's important. But that's not the what's important is the spirit of Tolkien's work. Is this something which is about love and friendship and hope and good overcoming evil against all odds? Is this about connecting with the nature of the world around us and seeing the evil of corruption of that world? Is that the kind of story that we're seeing here? That's the kind of thing that I think gets the kind of hardcore fans I know much more engaged. And for all of that, it's a matter of waiting and seeing, really. The showrunners have said a lot of the right words, but it's easy to say right words. We'll have to wait and see. I'm full of hope, which is very much a Tolkien theme, of course. So I hope other people are too. Let's. I'm just having a quick flick through the chat. I've got one more comment and one more question from my patron. So what I will probably do is answer that, and then I'll come back to the chat and pick up as many more questions from there as I can. Yeah, sounds like whoever found it on their Amazon, it looks like you're just very lucky. Everyone else seems to be still waiting for 2 hours for this, which is absolutely fine. So, Mara Lee, 2 burning questions I still have is, will we get introduced to Sauron in the first season, and will it be clear to viewers that this is who this person is? And the other is Meteor Man. So we will, and did the showrunners give you any clues as to who this person might be, or did they want to keep it a secret? Well, Meteor Man and Sauron are 2 of the big mysteries of season 1. The showrunners have been reasonably clear about that. Meteor Man, who Meteor Man is, why they're there, what's going on, is clearly a setup, because this character arrives and the Harfords don't know who this is. The Harfords are also, although if they're proto-hobbits, will have their own kind of homely wisdom, they won't have the great learning and understanding, so they may not know who this person is. They may not be able to recognize it. If Meteor Man crash landed in Lindon, then Gil-galad would have a much better chance of figuring it out than Nori and any of the other Harfords. So we will be taken along on a journey of discovering who this character is. Another mystery is who Sauron is. Now, we know Sauron is the central figure of the Second Age. There's no doubt about this. I think the way I summarized it in a video about what Sauron did in the Second Age was that he's not always active in the Second Age, but when he is, kingdoms fall before him. Nations get conquered and wiped out. He has a huge influence on absolutely everything. So the identity of Sauron is going to be hugely important, because he will not always look like Sauron. Sauron at this point in time was a shapeshifter. He could take on any form that he wanted. And we know that in the Second Age, he started out, or at least when he came and tricked people into forging the Rings of Power, he had the form of Anatar, the giver of gifts, the Lord of Gifts, which was, in Tolkien's words, of fair hue, which we tend to interpret as sexy Sauron. So he looks good, but we don't have a detailed description of what he looks like, which means that he could be theoretically any of the characters that we've seen there. Now, realistically, it's not going to be the characters that we know. It's not going to be Galadriel, it's not going to be Elrond, it's not going to be Gil-galad, it's not going to be Durin, it's not the characters that we know the names of. I mean, clearly it's not going to be Elendil or Isildur, or they end up fighting him. So it has to be one of these new characters. So the guessing game will be on as to who Sauron is. I suspect, I don't have any inside knowledge on this, but I suspect that the identity of Sauron will have to be revealed at the end of this season or at the latest the beginning of next season, because by the time we get to the Forging of the Rings of Power, it's going to be obvious to anyone who's read the books who this is. If this guy called Anatar turns up and starts saying, "Hey, I know how to forge rings of power. Do you want to come and join me?" Everyone will know, and once half the audience knows, then it will be out there. So they will have to do a reveal. They'll have to do a big reveal or something. I guess at the end of this season, but I can't be 100% sure on that. Reflective Rambling, while it's early to say from the preview, do you think that they have space to tie up the season arcs, the massive cast and theme to feel purposeful? And my main concern. Well, I hope so. It is a massive cast. There are lots of big storylines. I mean, some of the big storylines are big storylines which are going to be over a 5-season arc. But if you take the thing, these are the things that came from the trailers, so this isn't entirely new. This isn't me telling you any spoilers or anything. But clearly, there's some of these story arcs are that the Harfords discover Meteor Man, who is Meteor Man, and what's going to happen. That could be done in a season. That you could do that in one episode if you wanted to, but I imagine that they will make that happen over a season. Clearly, there's Galadriel is hunting for Sauron at the beginning bit of this. That has to reach some kind of resolution at some point. There's something going on with Elrond and the dwarves and Celebrimbor. They have to come to. We know they have to come to some kind of agreement at some point. So there's these things. They definitely can. The bigger themes should take a whole 5 seasons to go. We've been told that they mapped out 5 seasons. They pitched this as a 5-season thing, and it has been accepted as a 5-season thing, which means that we shouldn't expect everything to be wrapped up at the end of season 1, but we should expect the key plot, if not the themes, to be wrapped up relatively easy, straightforwardly, I think. That was my last question by the way, from my patrons. And patrons, I should just say thank you very much. I think I said it at the beginning, but if you do want to support this channel, the best way to support this channel is through Patreon. There's a link down in the description. Let's look at Midnight's Oblivion saying, makes no sense that Meteor Man is Sauron. He was unaware of the hobbits in the Third Age. He was unaware of Baggins and the Shire in the Third Age, specifically because that's what he managed to get from Gollum. The Shire, the hobbits did not move to the Shire until partway through the Third Age. So I understand the point you're making, but I don't think that in and of itself is a reason why Meteor Man is not Sauron. I think I'm not going to speculate on who Sauron is. Kaziglu Bay saying t-shirts that say Meteor Man is Blood Raven. I would buy one. Yeah, absolutely. Boris Dorofeev saying, why does Galadriel's sword have such a giant hilt? I don't know. You would have to ask a sword expert on that. I don't know whether that is I'm just at the end of my knowledge in that one. I don't know whether that's a fair and accurate thing. It looks to me like that's the kind of, it could be a two-handed sword. She certainly doesn't appear to be wearing a shield, so you would want a sword, either a two-handed or a hand and a half sword that you could use one-handed or two-handed. Matthew Bacon saying Bran will become king of the hobbits after all. Who has a better story? Excellent. Clayton Hosty saying the Ents also existed back in the Second Age. Yes, the Ents did, and we have had a shot of the Ents in the trailer. So the Ents, whether they make a big thing of this or not, but the Ents definitely are there. The Ents, the thing to look out for with the Ents in the Second Age, so the Ent wives may still be there, but they may well get destroyed. This is something that Tolkien speculated on, again, in this idea of like him just discovering stuff. He speculated on the idea that the Entwise were destroyed while Sauron was retreating back towards Mordor at the end of the Second Age. Matthias saying the regret in Robert's voice as he says, which we tend to interpret as sexy Sauron, was hilarious. Was there regret there? I've got no. Sexy Sauron works for me. I think that's the way that. I mean, if Tolkien were around today, he might not use sexy Sauron, but that's the that we understand what that means. He's of fair hue. Let's have a quick flick through. Fred, I've read Lord of the Rings twice in one summer. Never became a believer. Curious about this show because Robert fired my curiosity. Don't really understand how this show could make people so angry. Yeah, I mean, I always find it quite curious how a work of fiction or a TV show could make people that angry. Sword Questions ask Shadversity. Yes, great channel. Do go and have a quick look at that. People Profiles, did you meet Bezos at the premiere? I did not meet Bezos at the premiere. I did see Bezos at the premiere. So let's have a Nemo Nova, proud supporter of In Deep Geek on Patreon. Well, thank you very much indeed. Okay, I think with that I'm going to start pulling this one to a close, but what I just want to say, things to look out for over the course of the next few days. Obviously the episodes themselves will be appearing in now an hour and 3/4, so look out for that. My episode breakdown will be appearing hopefully at 9 o'clock my time. That's 4 p.m. Eastern time tomorrow. The day after that I talked about it a little bit earlier, but my the biography that I've been of Tolkien that I co-produced with People Profiles, it's going to be appearing over on his channel first, later this evening, and then on my channel on the day after tomorrow. So that's when that's going to be appearing. In terms of the rhythm of these live streams from now on through the time, we've got 2 shows going on at the same time. Obviously the rhythm is that I will be doing these Thursday live streams are going to be the pre-show live streams for the Rings of Power. I'm going to be doing the Sunday evening again, 5 p.m. Eastern, pre-show live streams for House of the Dragon. So we'll be doing 2 live streams per week. All of them are fundraisers for Alzheimer's care and research. So thank you very much to everyone who's donated. We got up to, I think, $2,100 today. Really excited about that. If we get, I mean, I'm absolutely delighted by the generosity of this community, and if we can push this up to a much bigger number by the end of the season, it's gonna make me so proud of you all and what we've accomplished here. So thank you so much for your incredible generosity. Moderators, thank you. You've done an amazing job again today. I hugely appreciate what you do. Appearing a little bit later, if you're watching this back a little bit later, here is going to be a link to some other live streams that I've done. Appearing somewhere around here is going to be a link to my Patreon page. That's the best way to support this channel if you so wish. Okay, take care everyone. Thank you for the fantastic questions, and I will see you again soon.